thing. And, oh, look at this, folks.
Oh, here she is,
watch
Carol.
Daily Gumbo TV for the Davis Hill weather stick.
It's always sunny on Gumbo TV.
It is always sunny on Gumbo TV, isn't it?
That's a good one. That came out great.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right, so we're ready for our guests to come in. Our first segment of Cape Cod Clam Chatter.
Yes, Paul, we have Joyce and John Wagner.
Yes, Joyce and John Wagner are our guests. John works for Weston and Sampson architectural firm. He's the senior senior landscape architect for the firm of Sampson and Weston, and he oversaw apparently the building of the Vietnam War Memorial in Worcester.
Worcester, right.
Now, last spring, that's how long ago it was, several of us from the Gumbo Show went up with John and shot a little bit of a documentary about the memorial. We actually showed it last week just to make sure it worked before we had John come in as a guest. But John is here today with us, and he is not at the door. Are we swapping microphones? Okay. Let's bring somebody in soon.
Welcome to live TV.
It's not live. It's
We're doing the best
TV.
we can.
It's live, but it's also access. And by the way, I can't hear a word you're saying.
Really? Again? How's that?
Really?
Any better?
That's better.
Well, I posted on our Gumbo Facebook page
yeah.
that
What did you post?
that we are giving away those tickets.
Okay.
So if you're a little shy and you don't want to call in and you want to go right to the Gumbo page right now,
You're calling and talking.
some people are.
Oy.
Some people.
Hey, what are we
just
seeing for
shy.
movies, Paul?
It's all right.
I can't hear. What are you saying?
What are we seeing for movies?
I still can't hear what John. I mean, I can read your lips. And I know you're saying, what are we seeing for movies?
What are we seeing for movies?
We're going to go see Howl, which is a biography of part of Allen Ginsberg's life.
Oh, okay.
Who is the father of the Beat generation.
There he is.
Here's John now, and his wife Joyce. Hey John, how you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
Glad you could make it to our Cape Cod Clam Chatter segment of your Daily Gumbo. Hi Joyce.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you.
Do we have any clam chowder?
Do we have any clam chowder? This is clam chatter.
Oh,
We're
clam
chattering
chatter.
instead of chowdering.
Sorry.
So as I mentioned before, John is the senior architectural designer. Is that right?
Landscape architect.
Landscape
yes.
architect. That's right. For Weston and Sampson.
Right.
And you were instrumental in getting the Vietnam War Memorial finally. Let me get that out.
Right.
Finally up.
That
up
started in
Massachusetts.
1982 with the Boston Vietnam Vets of America.
Uh-huh.
Went from one organization to another. Initially, they wanted to try and do it in Boston, and then it was determined that they should do it in a central Massachusetts area so that it would be more accessible for everyone around the state. So Worcester was selected, and we did a site selection of about 15 different sites, and then put it out for a national competition. And 3 artisans submitted a design, and then that was promoted through the Governor's Council. And it took just 20 years to get it approved by the Massachusetts legislature.
You're not surprised.
Not quite as long as it takes to canonize a saint, but
Yeah, I
close.
thought I'd be in the ground by the time the Vietnam Vets Memorial got done.
Well,
but
I'm glad it's not. It's a beautiful place.
no, it
Very
is
tranquil. And
special. Yes,
I just said tranquil. Tranquil.
it's all right.
Yeah, it is.
You've
a
had too
special
much
spot.
clam chowder.
So we have the clip finally.
Yes.
And we did run it last week or the week before, because I wanted to just make sure that it worked okay.
Right.
So we're going to run it whenever you feel like we want to go into it, and because we get the whole half hour here. So
Okay.
are you guys ready with that in there? Okay. So whenever you're ready. So what did I want to ask you about it? You had told us a story about the. Oh, actually, you know, I'm giving it away. I guess I can't.
Okay.
I can't really. I was going to talk about the having the helicopters go over, but I forgot. That's in the clip. So.
Okay.
All right. So why don't we just go ahead and is there anything else you wanted to?
Well, the one thing I'd like to do before we get into it is I'd like to make certain that everyone knows that the American Legion in Wareham is going to host this collation, a luncheon after the Veterans Day Parade. And I'd really like any participants to call Jim Newman at the Veterans Council. It's 291-3100 and it's extension 6513 to let us know that you're going to be in the parade, and I'll be forming the parade at around 10 o'clock at Bessie Park, and we'll proceed from there.
Very good.
I'd like to say one thing that might be interesting. I'm not sure if you told them about the Vietnam Vets Memorial. At the opening, there was a Vietnamese unit that came and thanked the United States for its participation. It was very moving.
I bet.
So that all the veterans were there, and that was really moving for them.
Oh.
And I just wanted to recognize that.
It was good. There were a few thousand people at the opening, and it was wonderful. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, so you want to go ahead and run that, puppy? Go ahead.
We haven't seen it
Are these on?
The memorial here was dedicated in 2002. It is the state of Massachusetts Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's situated on 4 acres here in the city of Worcester. It's in Green Hill Park, which is right off of Route 9 in Worcester, which is a main thoroughfare coming through. It honors those Massachusetts soldiers who were killed in action.
The Boston Veterans, Vietnam Veterans of America, acronym VVA, started a group to try and select a location and a design for a Vietnam Vets Memorial. That led to a statewide competition. It led to a site search committee to try and find a site that was centralized. A lot of the emphasis wanted to be in Boston, and we as veterans felt it should be more centrally located. So Worcester was an area that we approached. The mayor and the board, the council and so forth allowed us to look at about 10-12 sites in Worcester. This was selected because it had the pond, and the pond, the water element, and the rice paddy theory of Vietnam with the aquatic vegetation was an important part of it. Green Hill Park is a signature park in Massachusetts. It has a petting zoo, it has community gardens, it has 1800s refectory, fishing in the pond and the lake, has an 18-hole golf course that is very reasonable for the charges. So, I mean, it's just everything it can be to the city. And as we went through the competition, the competition was done by some artisans, and they presented a scheme that had the place of flags, which was the entrance and gateway to the memorial. Then they had the place of names, which listed the 1,550 men who gave their ultimate sacrifice. And the place of words, which was a selection of letters from literally thousands of letters that the committee selected to put on the 80-ton granite monoliths. Every one of these monoliths is between 70 and 80 tons.
I believe that I made it to protect these names of these people that served and died over there. I played football against a couple, I played football with a couple, and I hung around with a few of them. As you can see, we have the place of words, which is very impressive. It's a beautiful memorial. I've been around states that have memorials, but they're not as big as this. Believe it or not, I think that's why I made it over there, because I was wounded the second week I was there, and I said, this is great. I only got 50 more weeks to go, and I already hit the jackpot. So this is a beautiful memorial, as you can see, with the place of names, which is very important to the veteran who served over there, which I did. I was a combat veteran of the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam.
There's actually 1,545 names engraved on the monoliths that are surrounding us now. We have family members that come up here and they're looking for their names, so all the names are listed here. We are very blessed that we have volunteers who take care of this memorial over the seasons. The pathways need to be plowed. We have a group that has come forward of Vietnam veterans called Vietnam Veterans for the Community. They volunteer to come up, and they might be just picking up trash, or they're seeing where maybe there was some damage to some trees. They help with the fundraising.
We, after 18 years, were able to convince the state through the Governor's Council to fund through the Department of Veterans Services a $1.2 million grant to construct this, which started in about 2000. It was completed in 2002 with a large ceremony with Senator John Kerry. We had a helicopter flyover, very deja vu of Vietnam. And that was a surprise to everyone. No one expected it. So you can imagine the Vietnam vets sitting in the bleachers, and all of a sudden a squad of helicopters coming over. It's a little bit shaky. You didn't, you thought you were in a different place. The firm of Weston and Sampson, which I work for, I'm a senior landscape architect, was able to win the project because I think I was quite familiar with the whole design competition and so forth, and ended up doing the construction monitoring, and we're currently designing further improvements. What happened was there were fields built up on the hill behind here, and the runoff from that area tends to wash out areas. So you'll see a whole new drainage, swale, and boardwalk system. But there's a walkway all around the 4 acres, some with boardwalk across wetlands and so forth. Kids fish in the pond. All of the monoliths in the pond are lit at night, so you can read the letters at any time. It's truly I think, a magnificent sight, because it's not just a piece of stone. It's something you experience, and you have different experiences as you go through it.
Big part of this memorial is to have funds to be able to maintain it. Over the years, we've gotten funding from the state of Massachusetts through yearly supplements, but with the crisis the way it is with the economy, in the last couple of years, to include the next fiscal year, we haven't been allowed any monies. We do the fundraising as best we can, or the volunteers to do the work. Right. So we're not paying people. It is maintained through the city of Worcester Parks Department. It started off at like $10,000. So there are the laborers that will be out here mowing the lawns. We apply for grants every year, so we might get a grant to replace perennials or trees that might have been damaged. We go through the Bank of America, through the Wheeler grant. We have, on a small scale, over the years, we've had events like golf tournaments. You know, those raise a couple $1,000s. We do have some items that we might be selling on our website. We do have a website.
The city of Worcester has done just a phenomenal job in taking care of it. The landscape materials, the stonework, everything is kept in such a grand fashion with no money, literally.
I myself am a veteran. I wasn't in Vietnam, but I served during the Vietnam era, and the job, it was just part of the job that you'd be involved in planning the memorial. So there was a committee of about 30 people. It was chaired by Pierce Gould, who was the former veterans agent prior to me, and I was the secretary. And it's just been a labor of love, like you said, and some of the committee members have changed over the years.
But the committee deserves a tremendous amount of credit for continually working on this. God bless America and our veterans. One of the things we'd like to have come out of this interview and the video and so forth is to possibly allow people to contribute to the upkeep of the memorial on a perpetual basis.
First view of it.
Could I say one thing that was on the tape that you might have forgotten? Like the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, people started to leave souvenirs or things at the place of names, the same as they do in Washington. Now, none of those things can be thrown away. They, even in Washington, they keep them and catalog them. And so all of a sudden, that was something that they hadn't planned on, that you had to keep track of everything that was left.
Is someone doing that? They are.
Yes, there's some veterans groups that are volunteering to do that.
It's a great idea, because down the road, like just the distance between us and the Civil War and how interested we are in it now, the future generations will be just as interested in and keeping records rather than like catch as catch can, which is what we get from the Civil War. Like, oh, I found some old letters in my attic.
Right.
You guys are doing that already and preparing for that. That's doing the future generations a really big favor.
And when someone leaves something at the, it's from their heart. We were surprised to see people leaving Purple Hearts. Certainly there's always roses left
medals,
and stuff like that, and different medals. And when you see them, you realize that they've left much more than just a little medal in a box. It just was something that meant so much to them.
Yeah, a piece of them.
Yeah.
Well, Worcester has done a very good job in taking care of the memorial, obviously. It's a big responsibility. You cannot let any aspect of it fail, so that the public comes and says, my God, somebody's not taking care of this. So
it is a jewel. It really is a jewel.
It's a very special thing. And I'd like to thank your staff. You did a beautiful job of presenting it. I really appreciate it. A few years ago, they had 3 young men who apparently didn't have any respect for those who sacrificed their lives, and they spray painted the place of names, and it cost the town, cost the city approximately $75,000 to $80,000 to clean.
Wow.
And their penalty, I think, was 20 hours of community service, which is absolutely ridiculous. So it's kind of strange how our country allows some of these things to happen without a great deal of penalty. And it's easy for people to do things wrong and get away with it. But
it only takes a short amount of time.
Versus
the amount of
it's
time
a $5 can of spray paint costs you $75,000. So it's been very hard for them to do. And now that the state is no longer funding the perpetual care, if you will, everything is done by volunteers. There are veterans groups that ride their bicycles, their motorcycles. And what they do is fundraising runs. They go from here to the western part of the state, from here to Provincetown, stopping at different places, raising funds. And the one thing I wanted to mention was there's a group called the Rolling Thunder, which is a motorcycle club national that has probably, I would say 750,000 to 1 million members. And about 10 years ago, Joyce and I went to Washington to visit the Vietnam Memorial. I had avoided it for 20 years because I really didn't want to do it emotionally.
I understand.
And so we drove down to the mall, and we couldn't find a place to park, and we're driving around, and all of a sudden a policeman stops traffic and waves us in, and all of a sudden we're in the motorcade of the Rolling Thunder, and there were only 500,000 motorcyclists there, and the motorcycles...
Wait. How many?
500,000.
Holy smokes.
They gather at Memorial Day. They have a Paul Revere and the Raiders concert. They raise money. And what they do is they sell things and raise money from the concert to be able to buy back the remains from Vietnam. The United States has a policy where it won't be held hostage to pay for the remains of those who were missing in action. So any of the remains that Vietnam wants to, quote, sell, the Rolling Thunder raises funds for that and makes arrangements to have the remains transported to this country. So they're really wonderful. And
it seems like a misbegotten rule, if you ask me.
Yeah,
we have a policy. I mean, I understand that we don't want to negotiate with terrorists, which we've been doing since George Washington, but I understand the desire to not want to, but this is not the same thing.
Well, it's crazy because...
This is people's families who send their children to defend the country, and we won't... I don't care. It cost us money to get them over there.
Right.
It's
the old adage.
Considering how much we spend, how much would it really cost?
Well, how many military cemeteries do we have in Europe? in Normandy. We've left thousands and thousands of our dead behind in where did
Luxembourg.
Yeah,
Luxembourg.
but we know where they are, and they have
But
great,
still, what other
these
country?
are unknown remains, right?
Do we have cemeteries in this country for French people that have given up their lives for us, for the English people? We don't. We're the only country that has that, and it has to be recognized that many families left their dead in other countries, and many of them did not have the funds to bring them back home either.
Right.
So it's
yeah, it shouldn't be the responsibility of the families.
No,
the families
it
didn't send them over there.
It shouldn't.
And,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like I wouldn't mind paying for it. You know,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure if you ask most anybody, they're not going to mind to pay for that. The expense can't be that big. It just can't be that big.
It's just that the country won't release it because it's a communist country, and so they basically
Hold you hostage.
they basically hold you hostage, and that's what the government will refuse to pay for because they don't want our citizens kidnapped and so forth.
Well, that's what I say. It's principles. It's a soapbox they're standing on that I think is the wrong place.
Yeah, it's wrong. And
it's so hard because our generation of pushing 70. I was born December 2nd, 1941. Within 5 days, Pearl Harbor was bombed. My father, within a month, enlisted and left. My mother with 3 children, and that was nothing new because
came back 5 years later.
Yes,
right.
That was nothing new. Men did that at that time, so that it's so hard for society today to understand why we're still trying to wave the flag, and many organizations are trying to hide the flag. For us, if you go to the Providence VA, you walk through the doors and over the porthole says, through these doors pass our country's heroes. And isn't that the truth? But many of us don't still recognize that.
Right.
You know,
Well,
it's odd.
I have a hard time finding those people, though, the ones that don't recognize it. And maybe it's just because of the age that I'm at, too. I mean, I was the younger brother of the Vietnam veteran, as it were. I was born in 1958, so I just missed it.
We would have loved to have you.
But I knew of it. You know, I mean, I was keenly aware of it. You know, we weren't ignorant of the whole thing. What's that?
We're at war now. How many of us think about it? We have an election coming up in 2 weeks. Have you heard any of the politicians mention that we're in a war? And how many of us really take time to think about the guys that are over there? I don't know what they're calling it now. They've been pulled out, but there's still so many there.
Well, they can call it whatever they want to. There's 50,000 troops in a country where that country wants to kill them. I would still call it a war.
Well, I'll tell you
You
a
can
funny
call it whatever
story.
you want to, but
These poppies are things that the American Legion sells, and what they do is they sell them for any donation. All of the money goes to wounded soldiers that are usually in hospitals, and it pays for stuff that the government won't pay for: cosmetics, clothing,
and
shirts.
that's actually what I was
kind of
getting to.
thing.
You know, having not been a veteran, I still don't mind paying for that stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's like you guys went and did something that I would rather have not done. If I had to, I would have, I suppose. I don't know, because I didn't have that opportunity because of the way things, just my chronology. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's like that either. I'm pretty sure that almost anyone would be willing to pay for what's necessary.
We sold, the American Legion, 3 or 4 of us sold approximately 2,000 poppies around Memorial Day. And I can't tell you how many people said that they wouldn't buy them because they don't believe in war. And we said, well, this doesn't support the war. It supports the people who are taking care of.
That's
hopefully
an education issue, which needs to, and I'm probably every veteran certainly that I've spoken to on the show, but most veterans, I'm pretty sure, would not be against educating people on the difference. But you know what the problem is that people that are in the media mix up the two.
They do
so often because they have their own agenda, what they want to do. The difference between the soldier that goes off to fight the war
and the violence,
the politician that that promulgates the war and the violence of the war itself. They're not all the same thing. They're different things, and they require you to think of them in different parts of your mind and deal with them separately as well.
Well,
and a lot of people just don't, because the media wants to deliberately blur those lines.
When we sold the poppies, many people gave a contribution and said, keep the poppy. And I would say to them, do you have a grandchild? Do you have a child out there? And they say yes. And I'd say, go home and tell them what it's for. I bet you they don't even know about the poppy and what it is for. So that you're right as far as educating them. I try and remind my grandchildren that there are men and women over there that are sacrificing their lives for them. So that I would hope more people would remember that. That there are men and women sacrificing for their freedom. As much as we downplay our country, this is the most wonderful country to live in. It's my feeling, and people have sacrificed to make it so. So
I wanted to bring Joyce today because there are so many issues relative to family when the head of a household, whether it's a male or a female service member, gets deployed overseas, because the responsibility for the one at home is just absolutely phenomenal.
It's got to be.
To care for the house, to care for the children. When I was in Vietnam, my second daughter was born 2 months after I deployed to Vietnam. So I didn't see my daughter until she was almost a year old. And my wife had to care for her in an apartment with a 2-year-old as well. And she wasn't treated well by her neighbors. Her neighbors felt that, you know, if you were a service member's wife, you were almost a traitor to the cause of decency and humanity. And that's true, because she was pregnant 8 months, 7, 8 months when I left, and people wouldn't even help her when her car got stopped.
Wow.
Because her neighbors knew that I was in Vietnam, and so they just let her sit.
That's just absurd.
So it was terrible. So she suffered more than I did. I mean, at least I had somebody to shoot at. She couldn't shoot at anybody. So
I marvel at the families today whose husbands are deployed 2, 3, 4 times, because not only do you have to, if you have children, have to try and keep a positive attitude. You certainly can't go around moping all the time when you have small children.
Right.
And so that it's not only your feeling, is my husband going to die or come home alive? And today it's men who are taking care of the children also. But it's the feeling, is he going to become maimed? Is he going to lose his arms?
Right.
Is he going to lose his
What's
legs?
going to happen when they come back, and how much more effort is that going to be?
And I tell you what I wasn't prepared for. I thought my husband came home, that was the main thing. But I was not prepared for what he brought home mentally.
Excuse me 1 second. Hey guys, can you shut that door?
I was not prepared for what he brought home mentally. That was, I figured when he came home, everything was going to be over and everything was going to be all right. But that was a whole different war that you fought then and didn't have any trouble, any help for. And certainly, when we say today to men in the service, thank you for the service, if they have a family, say to their wife, thank you for your sacrifice too, or vice versa today.
Well, really, isn't that true? I mean, when the head of a household goes off to war, that's not the only person that's really fighting the war.
Unfortunately,
that's the entire family.
You're right.
It doesn't matter if they're a 2-month-old baby or the mother and wife.
Yes.
The whole family is actually responsible for fighting the war at that point. And it seems to me that there should be some sort of compensation, if not cash in the pocket, at least some sort of social programs that support it.
Yes.
Well, the divorce,
support the family.
the divorce rate,
And
the separation rate, the suicide rate for folks coming back ever since the Gulf Storm Wars is just absolutely unbelievable. The other thing is the homeless that you see on the street. For some reason, and I don't know why, because I've been involved with feeding the homeless and helping the Vietnam homeless shelter and so forth in Worcester and Boston. Over 60% of the homeless are veterans, not just Vietnam, but veterans. And I don't understand why that is. It has to be somehow or other that there's a switch that goes off or a disconnect somewhere about living normally when you come back. And I can't imagine the things that the guys see in Iran and Afghanistan, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and come back here and in one day are expected to assimilate back into society and be normal, drive the kids to daycare, go to the school PTA, go to church on Sunday and not have reactions.
It's because they look so
amazing.
normal. They
Yes.
come back and
Yeah.
you know, first of all, Dad's back.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a relaxation mode that goes on. and until, I'm guessing, and until what you realized when he came back, you don't know that's going to happen. And even, you know, it's kind of like, you know, when people get involved in new things, that's not going to happen to me. That won't happen to us. You kind of don't want it to, so you don't believe it's going to.
Exactly.
And then when it does, it still comes as a surprise. And all of the fear and all of the emotional wreckage that has the potential of showing up is going to. It's just a matter, I'm sure, of how and what time it's going to show up.
People say to me sometimes, you know, they're tired of the Vietnam vet. They're tired of what he looks like because he's not the guy that goes out polished. You see him marching in the parade. He's got a scuffy beard. He's not wearing his pressed fatigues and all these other stuff, you know. But you have to understand that that's the only vet that has come back to this country and has been ridiculed. Let's hope we've learned to that. But he has been ridiculed, and the sacrifice that he made not only, you know, affect him mentally, but the reaction of the country affected them mentally. So, you know, when you see them out there in their scrubby jeans and all this other, and some of them are going off and living in the woods all alone or whatever, you can understand in a way that they're running away from the society that they thought they were going to help.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's why people said to me, why did your husband go off to war? He finished graduate school. Why didn't he just go and support his family? Why did he? Because that was what we thought was the right thing to do. But and then,
well, he was. I mean, I wasn't old enough to be a vet, but I certainly was there to hear all of the stuff that, well, you know, it is your duty. You know, you have to go, and you should go, and you should want to go. It's, I mean, all of the stuff that they were feeding us, which, I mean, you know, still, I'm not sure anybody that really actually understands the reason what we were doing there. I know how, I know the history. I know how we got there. I know which president started it, et cetera. I know what happened in, you know, because of the French prior, et cetera, et cetera. I know that. That's still not the raison d'etre, as it were, that we were actually there. And I've never heard a really satisfactory answer.
Unfortunately, the guys probably don't realize know either. And don't
right, but that's what ticked people off.
Right.
But again, there's a separation between the soldier themselves and the reason for the war and the politics behind the war. Those are all different issues that need to be understood before you can get anywhere as far as healing any of those wounds is concerned.
Don't forget all of those that ran to Canada were pardoned. I mean, here guys gave up their lives, they come back, they're being ridiculed, and the guys that left and went to Canada were pardoned.
To avoid the draft,
I would like to talk more about that in a second, but we have to take a quick break for ID and a weather break, okay?
Great.
So we'll be right back.
It's always
Daily
sunny
Gumbo TV.
on Gumbo TV. Yes, full moon tomorrow night, meteor shower tonight.
Oh, we're going to get all meteored tonight. Oh.
What?
Get a broom.
Oh, here we go. Mike.
I watch the Daily Gumbo TV for the fashion tips.
Yay, Mike.
Now the audio on that was good.
Yeah, that was perfect.
All right, we're back at Cape Cod Clam Chatter with John and Joyce. So we were talking about something that was
amnesty.
Important. Amnesty, okay.
Yeah, it just seemed odd to me that the people respected the people who went to Canada to avoid the draft, came back and were given amnesty. And for the most part, the Vietnam veterans didn't really resent it strongly. They didn't present a great protest against it. And, you know, we've kind of, how could I say it, made amends with everybody and tried to just have our peace. But somehow or other, it just seemed unfair somehow that people, for instance, they had the Kennedy bill, if your wife was pregnant or if you were in college, you didn't have to participate in the war. You could get out of the war. I was in both situations. I guess I was planning not to go. I got her pregnant and I went to school. But I still ended up going because I had a commission. I was commissioned at Cornell. And my first tour of duty, I had 425 men. They were short officers. I was a second lieutenant. and I had 425 men was my first company, which is the equivalent of a battalion commander, which should be a light lieutenant colonel.
Wow.
And you should have about 16 junior officers. So as a second lieutenant, I had 425 guys, and when I was in Nam, I had 125 specialists in a combat airborne engineer unit, but these were really good guys. They were all airborne, very committed. So it was easy to command them, and I felt more like a participant than a commander, which you do.
Which is probably a really good thing if you're going to
It
actually
is.
be a leader.
It is.
To feel that.
Especially in a combat situation, if they don't feel that you can do,
right.
you know, if you should do what they do.
Yeah, if you can't do what you're asking them to do.
That's
I mean,
right.
You know, that's the theme of many movies and stories, and not that I'm trying to mix up fact with fiction, but I mean the point of those stories is just what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, those are writers that learn from people like you that if you can't do what you're asking your men to do, then you really shouldn't be in the leadership role.
Along the same lines, when he was talking about some of his responsibilities, something we often talk about and laugh about is that when he got out of the service and went to look for employment, which I'm sure many of these guys today, it's difficult to find employment, but he was looking for employment, and he had gone to an engineering firm in New York. We were living at the time, and they said to him, well, he had 2 degrees at that time, and they said, and he was working on his master's at night, and they said to him, well, what experience do you have? You don't have any experience. You've never worked in an office, so you don't experience. I remember John said to one of them, he got sick of hearing about what experience did he have, and he said, well, I commanded 200 men, and you're telling me that doesn't count for anything, you know. And finally, the fellow that he said that to took it back, and he said, well, you got a point there.
Yeah.
And so that they hired him then. But out of the big engineering firm, it was only himself and one other fellow that had been in Vietnam.
250 men.
There was at the time some public service announcements that must have been done by some department or another in the military, where they actually made a point of that. It's almost like they took your example, where as I recall, it was a guy who was supposed to come back from Vietnam and he was looking for a job and was going through that same question. And all of the interviewers in the ad were asking, well, what experience do you have? What experience do you have? And of course, it hadn't dawned on him to say, you know, that answer yet. And then in the final one, he finally did say that. And I don't remember whether the guy got hired or not. That wasn't really the point. The point was that, you know, hey, employers realize that these guys have real world experience out there. And that's what we're talking about, you know, educating people. I mean, really, it's not a giant leap to realize that, you know, some kids at 17 or 18 years old are playing, and it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying this is bad at all, because this is how society works. But some kids at 18 years old are going off to college. Some of them are, you know, involved in the, you know, doing fake sword play and stuff like that. And there's other 18-year-olds out there that are commanding 200 and 300 guys from the helicopter, you know, while they're jumping on. That's, you know, it is the way the world works. Everyone isn't going to have the same experience, and that's fine. But jumping out of a helicopter while you're commanding a couple hundred guys is a real-world experience that can, in fact, be applied to almost any job that requires any kind of leadership skills.
Well, I think one of the big things that people don't understand is that the National Guard was intended to be on soil here in this country to work for emergency management and things like that.
Absolutely correct.
And their training as weekend soldiers, if you will, was not the equivalent of full-duty, full-time active service men. And these National Guard fellows who had jobs, blue-collar jobs, if you will, have been deployed 3 times or 4 times in 5 years. Well, how do you hold together a family? How do you even try and pay your bills in a household with military pay? Military pay is not the equivalent of civilian pay. So
particularly in the middle of your peak performance years.
You build up all these debts. Your family is scraping. Many of them, I know that many of them go to food pantries because they cannot afford what they should be able to afford for the sacrifice that their spouse is giving. But our country doesn't recognize it, and quite honestly, when a guy comes back as a quadriplegic or a double amputee, okay, the government doesn't refurnish his house, rebuild his apartment for handicapped accessibility. It's private citizens like Homes for the Troops, Support the Troops, groups that have to raise funds to accommodate a guy who is going to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair.
But we can give trillions to banks that have cheated us.
That's right.
I don't get it. So what do you suppose we should do? I mean, to be honest with you, you know, it's always, you know, like our whole generation, you know, the Vietnam War has always been a sticking point. What do you do?
Just
I
when
mean,
you're doing
all of it is in these, you know, these politicians' hands when it comes to program funding.
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of these programs would also put people to work, by the way.
Yes.
You know, so not even mention it, but you know, instead we give trillions back to people who have cheated us out of our own money. Because they're the experts, et cetera. I don't know what they're experts at, but anyway. And we don't have the kind of money that's necessary to take care of the people who you ask to go get their, you know, pardon my French, but they go to get their ass shot off.
Well, there's going to be a rude awakening because the Iraq-Afghan wars and continuing. And you have to realize we've already been there 10 years. I mean, that's a decade. It's huge.
Right, right.
The thousands of people that are coming back that are brain damaged or mentally disturbed, and we have very few psychiatric facilities in the service. One is in Hyannis. There's what they call a readjustment center. It's a wonderful center. The people are wonderful. But, you know, there's 2 or 3 people to handle hundreds of people coming back. And the biggest thing that I found from Vietnam on is that no service member wants to admit that he is mentally damaged. And he'll go through all kinds of hell. He'll go through divorce. He'll go drugs, alcoholism, everything, before he'll admit that he was damaged mentally and needs psychiatric help.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think has to happen in this country in general is people understanding that it's not it is a handicap, but a handicap is not the same thing as a weakness. And that is that it's the whole mentally ill community has to understand that no one's going to make fun of you because, except for morons. You know, it's always going to be, you know, that every group has its, you know.
Well, they're mentally defective too.
Well, actually, they are. That's actually where I was going with that. But the bottom line is, for the most part, no one is going to be upset with you because you've got something that's, you know, been organically, you know, ground into you that makes you that makes you not be able to handle or not be able to cope with every situation that comes up. Let's face it. There is no natural analog for example, working 40 hours a week, putting some money away, deferring your payments on what you need in order to eat. That's completely unnatural. You know, so of course there's going to be a huge amount of population that can't do it very well, and there'll be a huge a small part of the population that will be able to do well because they pretty much invent it, and then they invent more rules. And it's the same thing when you come back and you've got something wrong because of, you know, I can't think of the word, post-traumatic stress disorder. What has to happen is it has to be I think anyway. What has to happen is that when you come back, you have to realize that is okay. It's not okay to leave it, but it's okay. No one's going to think less of you because it's happened to you. And that there are people there to help. But the problem is, at least I think, is that there isn't that many people there to help because those programs aren't funded.
I think there needs to be a mechanism when a guy is released from the service, especially out of combat duty, that he goes through a debriefing period.
I think you're right.
When I came back from Vietnam, I had one day. I flew into McGuire Air Force Base on the morning of a Friday, and I was home the morning of the Saturday.
Right.
And I was supposed to assimilate back into society after being in the boondocks for a year. Now these guys are coming back, and you have to understand too, service people, the way they're trained is to have immense pride and immense strength and not show weakness. So the point is you're trained not to show weakness. So if in fact you have some sort of mental disability in the sense of having experienced things that you really can't handle, you're the last person in the world that's going to admit it because of your pride.
Right. Right.
And so it takes a professional, I think, to speak to these people coming out of the combat areas to say, I can sense something's wrong, and you need some help, and you need to stay in the service. You need to stay in the service until we take care of you.
Yeah.
Which means we'll pay you, we'll
Yep.
take care of you, we'll pay your medical
Right.
bills,
And hey,
not
you'll have a
release
job
you.
while you're there.
And not just release
yeah,
you.
I think you're right.
Well,
I think you're right.
this country is wonderful as far as raising monies and sending them to other countries and helping people in tragedies and things like that. But I think we put blinders on when we see what's happening in this country, the percentage of the homeless that are veterans. But not only that, I'm concerned about Wareham. What's happening in Wareham with your homeless here? You have people that are in a lot of trouble in Wareham. Your food kitchens are empty. The pantries are empty.
And we do have a lot of programs here in Wareham.
And
we do.
I mean,
have a lot
what
of them
is
here
it?
on the show.
70% of your children in school live under poverty levels, and I mean, and not doing well in the state, testing. We have to start looking inside to see what's happening. We're very good to send monies to different countries or here, there, and that, but we have to open our eyes and see what's happening downtown
But
and things like that.
that may be, I mean, you're absolutely correct. The thing is that I think when you look at the reality of the situation, you actually touched on a couple of, several different important issues, and one is that we as a country have a tendency to send our taxpayer cash to other countries, but it's less than you think. When people say that America is a very charitable country, most of the money that comes out of this country and goes to other countries is private funds.
Yes.
And you can't dictate where to put, because all of those things that are supplied, where that money goes outside the country is also very important, because even if you do take care of inside the country, if the rest of the world is going to hell, there is no safe haven. Right. So it all needs to be funded. We do have a lot of private organizations that fund programs for anybody. It's not just for veterans, although we do have veterans programs too. But they're also privately funded. What we don't have, at least as I see it, we don't have enough government-funded programs that kind of lead the way, where if at a minimum, they redistribute money to some of the private organizations that are already out there for veterans, and as well as other homeless people. So not just distributing cash, but also the leadership that's necessary. Our social services in Massachusetts are a nightmare and a joke. It's based on incentives of pulling families apart. You pull a family apart. You pull the male out of a family. $100,000 comes from the federal government, because it generates a statistic, because you took that male away. You take a female away, it's $75,000. Take a child away, it's $75,000, because there are programs set up for that. That's nonsense. But my point is that we don't have anything like that, even although they're nonsense. They're still funding, and somehow or another that we need to have those things funded as social programs. All of what you're talking about, we need taxpayer-based funded programs, and that will, by the way, again, create jobs.
Well, government funding.
It's a multi.
Government funding is really crazy. For instance, the Veterans Administration has been fighting for years to get Vietnam vets eligible for Agent Orange. Since 1987, it's been on the books that
they'll all be dead by the time it ever happens.
They are, most of them now. And the problem is, 2 months ago, the U.S. legislature funded $300 million to Vietnam to take care of people who are reacting to Agent Orange. $300 million, and not a penny for our own veterans.
How absurd is that?
We pay Pakistan billions of dollars, and their government is hiding people who are killing our soldiers. It's absolutely absurd that we don't somehow or other cut the cord and say, if you do this, you're in trouble.
I think the problem is that it's individuals that are greedy that are able to manipulate. They get somehow or another into places of power, and they're able to manipulate those dollars. I mean, that billions of dollars isn't going to the people in Pakistan either.
Absolutely not. I agree.
And part of that billions of dollars is not getting to Pakistan either.
It's like our food aid. Before the food gets to the people who need it, the corrupt politicians steal it.
Right.
When I was in Vietnam, I had a combat engineer unit that built hospitals, schools, dams, bridges, whatever, for the local populace. I had to work with the province chief, the local village chief. If I had a load of concrete come to the community, I had to give 10% to the province chief, 10% to the village chief, in order to allow them, to allow me to build something for them. So they took 20 to 25% in graft just to allow me to build something for their people.
It happens throughout
and it's throughout Asia.
Yeah, but it happens throughout the vertical integration of that project as well.
Absolutely.
Well,
I compliment your cable show for talking about this, because obviously, you know, society today is made up of a lot of baby boomers, and we're all frustrated. Young people, I don't blame them. They just don't understand because we've never really talked about it and things like that. So that people are becoming more verbal and more aware. Let's hope that we're able to make some changes out there, because if we go the way we're going, it looks kind of bleak.
Yeah, it really does.
So, you know, I compliment you on your program that you're able to give us this platform to air some of our little grievances. Actually, it's a therapy group for us.
Well, I also have to apologize to the people of Wareham, because we're from New York and we keep saying Wareham, and everybody keeps saying we don't wear them, we're Wareham. So I apologize.
Some people wear them this way, and some people wear them this way. But if you go to the Wareham, you get down Main Street.
That's right. That's right. Oh golly,
that's funny.
It is funny.
So you guys aren't from here originally? We're
New York City.
Queens, New York. Yep. We've run into many people who come from Queens also. You usually can tell in New York, though.
Yeah, right, that's right.
Coffee, car, water, Earl, Turlet.
We've been here for 35 years, and one thing I always get a kick out of is I have 3 daughters. They're all in their 40s, but all brought up in Massachusetts, but all 3 of them have New York accents. It must be that they, you know, picked it up from their mother.
It's all mom.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how long you're in the new place.
No, you can pick us out.
I think you're allowed a month after birth. After that, forget it. You're no longer a native.
We get ourselves in trouble in New England because we say what we feel, and that New Englanders don't like that. They're much more straight.
Yankee is the word.
And we laugh at a lot of things. Our sense of humor is different. It has to be quick. And so that they sometimes have a little patience with us that way.
We're nasty, that's what
But you have to understand.
You know, you say that, but I got to tell you, you know, I spent a lot of the 80s in New York. And I found the people in New York to actually be very going out of their way to be helpful. Like if you needed to know how to get somewhere, they make it clear, and they make sure you understand.
That's
where
because
you're going.
misery likes company.
That could be.
That could be,
because they certainly like to walk. That's one thing. In New York and Manhattan, whererever you're going, you're walking.
Well, we loved Massachusetts, and John went to graduate school in UMass, and we always said
UMass Amherst?
Yes. And we always said it would be nice to be able to come back, and it was a job that boss felt sorry for him as a vet. He was not able to travel the New York subway when he came home. He got a job, but the big thing was getting on the subway. He couldn't stand the crowds, and so that he'd have to leave for work really early and then keep on getting off every couple of stops to grab himself together and then get back in. And so that one thing led to another, and finally there was a boss who said to him, look, I've lost a landscape architect up in Boston. Do you want the job? And he said yes, and it was the best thing that ever happened for our family.
Well, I'm glad you came down.
Yeah. We moved both of our parents up. They came New Yorkers. We thought they're going to hate it, and they both loved it.
Isn't it more relaxing here than New York?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. We lived in Framingham and Ashland for 40 years and moved down here in 2004 and absolutely love it. If I would have known what was down here 20 years ago, I'd have been here.
We love Wareham.
Yeah.
Wareham.
I'm sorry.
I'll never teach her, I
Wherever it is I live.
It is beautiful. Yeah, where am I?
Well, this town has everything. People say, "Why did you go?" I said, "It's the greatest town. It has everything." Yeah,
it does.
It really does.
And we have pizza and coffee shops. That's for sure. There's no doubt about it. What's that? Yeah, you can just go anywhere and get a donut. That's never a problem.
You think?
John,
Thank you so much.
Very
And
nice
thank
to
you
have
for
you.
your staff.
Joyce, thank you for coming. That was
You guys did a
Thank
great
you.
job on the
fun.
show, and I appreciate it very much. And thank God for all the veterans. God bless them all.
God bless them all.
Absolutely.
John and
Thank you.
Joyce Wagner, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you.
All right.
All right.
So that's it for our.
All right, you got about a minute, buddy.
Segment of Cape Cod Clam Chatter.
Yep.
Let's see. This show will re-air tonight. Bye bye.
Okay.
And,